Hello and welcome to the Monster Mechanics Podcast, where we take creatures of myth and media and see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me as always is the Gilbert to my Sullivan, Zach Jaquays. What are we talking about today, Zach?
This week, we're talking about Terminators.
So, Terminators, which was originally just the one Terminator until it turned into a film franchise.
Yeah.
The fun fact I realized just before we started recording, apparently this comes from an actual fever dream from the mind of James Cameron. He was making another movie and he got ill and he was like super fevery and sick, and he like dreamed of a metallic torso carrying kitchen knives pulling itself out of an explosion, which sounds metal as hell, man. I like that.
Yeah, all my fever dreams are just my teeth falling out.
Yeah, I know. And then he managed to turn that into a multi-billion-dollar film franchise. So the Terminators are from the movie The Terminator, and then Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, and then forever and on. And they're going to make these movies until everybody is dead, and then they're going to resurrect them with CGI and continue to make them.
Oh, yeah.
But the basic premise of the original movie was that at some point in the future, not the far future, but just sort of like 30 years in the future, 20 years in the future, robots have taken over the world. And in an effort to, they had to take over the world, and the humans finally won the war and beat the robots. And the robots do a Hail Mary maneuver where they send one robot back into the past, and the robot is supposed to kill the leader of the human resistance that was the ones who defeated the robots. So they send one robot back to kill his mom before he's even born and erase him from history, and thus turn the tide of the war, I guess. And the humans manage to send back a single human soldier, and he tries to save the lady. And then, I guess, spoiler alert, if this wasn't already spoiler territory, the human soldier boinks with the mom, and then that's where the dude that they're trying to kill comes from. So, like, actually, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and they manage to defeat the robot, and then everybody, I won't say lives happily ever after, because there's like 18 more movies, so you can't live happily ever after with additional movies.
Yeah.
The Terminator itself is looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger because it's played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's a robot skeleton wrapped in a meat suit, basically. Yeah. The logic that the movie came up with was that they had to send back one of this meat suit versions of the Terminator because only biological material could go through the backwards time process, the time machine process. And apparently a robot wrapped in a human meat suit qualifies in that direction. The reason why the robots happened to have meat suit Arnold Schwarzenegger is because they were developing robots to infiltrate and take out human resistance cells. And so they originally, there's a line where they're talking about originally they used rubber, and it didn't look very real because, I mean, we've all been to the Hall of Presidents in Disney World, and you could tell if robot Abraham Lincoln from the Hall of Presidents came into your house, you'd probably think something was up.
I want to see all their like rejected lines. Like,
yeah.
Like, well, we couldn't figure out skin. So here's this guy we just covered him in wood.
Yeah. So they develop a robot covered in actual human flesh in order to be an infiltration unit. So that's the origin of this Terminator. And there is definitely some meat on here. We may get into.
You did that on purpose.
Yeah, I did, but that's okay. You didn't have to call it out like that. So now we may have to, I'm not going to say we're not going to talk about it, but I think to start with, we need to table all discussion of the weirdness that is time travel, because there are some arbitrary fucking rules here. And if we go down that path, then we won't have any time left for the meat suit skeletons. So we're going to table that discussion, and then we can come back to it later. Sure. If we want to later, but let's start with just a discussion of robots covered in meat,
which I think is awesome, because it's kind of the inverse of like the cyberpunk thing where you're replacing your organic bits with metal, and there's like, no, we need those organic bits.
Yeah, it's a reverse cyborg. It's like the inverse of the like, it's the robot becoming more human, which is actually kind of interesting. Yeah, I like the infiltration idea. I feel like, because one of the things that is made quite clear is that the the flesh that surrounds the Terminator is actual human flesh. Like it's real living tissue, because over the course of the movie, the Terminator takes damage and they make him look more corpse-like, and like they remove all the color from his face and make it look a little bit like he's degrading and rotting, because literally the flesh is dying on his skeleton. And that is a really cool concept that I would like to run with. I'd like to continue to use that. But from real, true, practical circumstances, like actually special effects has gotten to the point where you could totally like just make latex and like really well paint something and like make it look like a human. You don't need it to be flesh to fool people, I think. Is there some other good reason why the AI might need the flesh suit robots that we could use?
It's probably a plentiful resource up there.
Yeah. I haven't actually seen this one, but stealing something from the later movies was the idea that the Terminators of a particular type could skin somebody, put their skin on, and infiltrate as them is actually an interesting idea. Where you're actually like, you're taking on their identity.
Picturing that Men in Black situation with the roach alien.
Yeah. The only problem with that comes to mind is that if the skeleton is the size of Arnold Schwarzenegger and he kills a little dude, then that's going to get really stretched out. And I'm not sure that's going to be passable as a human.
I'm just imagining like the R&D process for that. Like, oh, right, we need to make these appropriately sized.
Yeah. We got to have a bunch of different like not just heights but also like widths and stuff, and like, or maybe they reconfigure, like they got like piston shoulders and stuff that can like come in and like lower themselves down, and like maybe I guess you could have a creature that like actually reconfigures the shape of its bones in order to better fit the meat suit that it's using. That's interesting. What if you could also look? There's also the internet meme that runs around, which is the reason why these things have been developed before the AI took over was that obviously humans built sex robots, and that it was just repurposing these for infiltration. I'm not sure I'm down with that idea as an origin story. I mean, like it's fine, it's easy, but like
it's funny, but
yeah, I'm not sure it makes all that much sense. You can also go from the idea of like, this is the AI trying to like explore the utility of using biological components. Like we always see versions of powerful AI on robots and stuff, and they never seem to utilize biological systems in a way that is interesting. They're always going for silicon chips and quantum technology and stuff like that. But like the human brain is actually quite advanced. It can do certain things really, really well. And I could actually imagine an AI exploiting that. Maybe like growing brain matter to incorporate into its own circuits and processors and stuff. And so if it's working down those lines, maybe it's also doing other things in that vein where it's creating flesh and like muscles and things like that could be useful to it, and trying to experiment with making a robot that is less robotic.
I just feel like there's like a missed opportunity to like it would be really cool if they took like, the brain matter from humans or whatever, but then they're like, oh, but humans aren't that great at these other tasks. So like, what if we had the body of a lion and
or like, it has a missile that it needs to have a controller for. So it grabs like it genetically engineers bird brains or something like that have like dedicated circuits, dedicated parts of the brain specifically for flying and for homing and things like that. And so it like gets in there and actually manipulates this biological matter to be purpose built for the jobs that it needs done. That could be really cool.
Yeah.
I really dig the idea of an AI that is also like deeply ingraining itself with biological matter, and like ends up being sort of a fusion between the circuit and the flesh and circuit, like a combination of metal and bone. Because like biological, like there are things that are advantageous from a meat-built creature. Like it repairs itself over time. It's adaptable in ways that like purpose-built machines aren't. yeah, that could be really useful to to an evil AI, you know?
I also feel like the movie Terminator is sort of like almost like a prelude to the Matrix movies, like
yeah, for sure.
In a universe where they won.
Yeah. That would be an that would be a cool, because you know there's the giant multiverse connection between like Blade Runner, Aliens, Predator. Like there's all these movies that sort of exist in the same cinematic universe, kind of tangentially, because they all have Easter eggs for one another. But that's another one. If in a different timeline, a different version of our timeline, where somebody did that with The Matrix and Terminator, that would be really cool. Like that honestly is a neat meshing of those stories.
Yeah.
Actually, it would be really cool swinging in another Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, but bring in Total Recall, where it's all about the editing of memories and combining that concept with the Matrix, where people can like have their memories edited inside of the Matrix. And
cool idea.
It's like to add in like components of your own storytelling and stuff, and like, you know, who you are and stuff. That could be really cool too.
Also, now I just really want to see The Matrix, but it's Arnold Schwarzenegger as Neo.
Oh, see, I was thinking Agent Smith, because he's the bad guy.
Oh yeah, I could see that.
I think he would be an amazing Agent Smith. Although, I mean, Hugo Weaving did a fantastic job. And then, yeah. That would be really cool. So, okay, then in this scenario where we're now combining elements of the Matrix with the Terminator movies, we can, like, okay, so I don't know if you know this, but the original concept for the Matrix was that the reason why the robots kept the humans around was as processing power. Using the old and entirely inaccurate saying of you only use 10% of your brain, right? They were the Wachowskis, when they developed the concept, said that the remaining 90% was what ran the Matrix. Like the robots plugged everybody in and then used that additional brain capacity in order to create the Matrix and run their own processes on it. And so that meant that the AI was in part inhabiting humans in a way, because it's actually like all your brain power is what's powering the AI and allowing it to think. And so when I remember hearing that, and honestly, that was kind of the idea that I thought made more sense anyway. My thought was like, oh, it's like the ghosts of machines haunting people's brains. Like that's the idea that came to my head, which I kind of love.
Oh, yeah.
And so a universe where, you know, I don't know if we mentioned the AI in Terminator is called Skynet. So if we say Skynet, that's what I'm talking about. In a universe where Skynet is not trying to kill all humans, but instead trying to capture all humans in order to add them to its own like processor banks and make use of them, is really cool. I think that's a much more compelling. It's a compelling idea of conflict, where if you lose somebody to the fight, suddenly everything they know becomes part of the enemy. You know, where, you know, everybody's like, oh, well, one of our dudes got captured. We got to leave now because this hiding space is now compromised because so-and-so knew where it was. And they're going to send the hunter-killer robot out here. Stuff like that.
Now entering the need for the total recall stuff.
Yeah. And okay, that's kind of cool, where if you have the ability to edit people's memories, maybe you can capture somebody, edit some of their memories, or add in, I guess, like subroutines or something like that, where you can change their behavior and then send them back out as sleeper agents. You know, that'd be kind of cool. Oh, dude, and the total recall thing, just as an aside, is it totally fits into the Matrix thing, because you can download skills in the Matrix. So obviously that technology is just a refinement of the previous total recall technology.
Well, I'm on board for this. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. In that case, it makes sense. Total recall happens inside the Matrix. Like, if they go to, like, in this version of it, I guess maybe they went to Mars or maybe they didn't, but the story of Total Recall happens inside of a Matrix, where this kind of editing and stuff can happen inside. Like it's a malleable world based on the program that is being run. And okay, there's an episode of Cracks After Hours where they posit the theory that all Schwarzenegger movies are just things happening to the Terminator as it gets reprogrammed to be good for Terminator 2. They're all tactical scenarios. But this, I mean, like in a one way, you could totally like we could steal a little bit of that idea for the Arnold Schwarzenegger of Total Recall is a Terminator program being trained or being learning and being experimented with by the AI, trying to figure out how it's going to react and how it can handle new situations and stuff. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Sort of a prototype for how they got the Agent Smith.
Yeah. So this is like the Agent Smith creation program. And then like this, it just so happens it went a little bit off the rails because, he fought back and, won the day, but you just reset the whole thing and run it again with different parameters to see how it goes. I'm down for that.
Yeah.
Is there any more, before we get too deep into the weeds on the Matrix side of it, is there any other like discussion we want to have about like the biological, like the physical manifestation of this biological components? Like, are there any other combinations of things that we would want to talk about? Like, do we have cybernetic rhinoceroses acting as beasts of labor or something like that, where it's like enhancing animals and stuff?
Like, I feel like the meat suit aspect like filled such a specific purpose. Like,
yeah.
I feel like you would only want to use like organic matter in cases like where you need that self-healing or, I don't know, maybe it makes like really good insulation or something.
Yeah, it could be. It's also, I don't know, you could probably do the math to find out whether digestion or like direct injection of power are better for like energy efficiency. Because maybe having a biological engine inside of it that can turn chemical matter into energy is a useful thing to have on certain kinds of robots and stuff, as opposed to being wired into a grid, especially for something that's going to have to go out into the world. Maybe, carrying food or finding food along the way is much easier than trying to like gather electricity from the environment or getting like batteries beamed in or something.
Well, to go back to the Matrix thing, wasn't like one of the lines that humanity had like darkened the skies basically to cut off the robots' access to solar power?
Yes. Which I like. I do like the idea that like maybe not specifically to attack their power needs or whatever, but like the fact that humanity has kind of ruined the planet, or specifically the war ruined the planet, the war between humans and robots, like devastates the planet, is definitely thematically appropriate. That I think is good. I like that.
And like obviously the machines would be looking at all avenues for additional, power and whatnot. So like I get the feeling that like maybe like some of it was just looking at those kind of alternate like fuel sources basically.
Yeah, it could be. In which case we can talk about things like chemosynthesis again, where you're where it goes to like find deep sea vents and like pull the chemistry and genetics out of tube worms and then make like cybernetic tube worms that produce energy for itself and stuff like that.
Yeah, they just hang around thermal vents.
Yeah. And for that matter, thermal power would be a very good use of very good source for power for something like this as well. So they go just deep underground and everything happens far below the surface. I've been playing a ton of Dyson Sphere program lately. So like my response to the whole like, well, they darken the skies is that what if the AI goes beyond the stars or goes beyond the sky and like starts taking over the solar system and then builds something like a Dyson swarm, which is just countless numbers of small satellites orbiting around a star, gathering solar energy and then turning that into computing power. Which I think like maybe this whole thing is actually happening inside of a Dyson swarm that the AI has developed in order to power itself and to run simulations on the humans.
Like if it's got like access to all these memories, like it knows about, like rocket physics and whatnot. So it wouldn't have any problem just leaving the planet because it's not got to worry about like a limited lifespan or anything like that.
Yeah. And AI, one of the questions that has plagued, I think, a lot of sci-fi authors and just scientific thinkers and stuff is the idea that to go out into the universe, like humans are a terrible choice. Like we are not built well to travel through space. We don't live very long. And we don't think on geological timescales. And so a lot of people have theorized the idea that humanity will never leave our solar system, that the only thing that might leave is whatever we create. Sort of like Voyager, right? Like we sent out a robot that we built in order to leave our solar system. And so maybe what we develop, whatever follows after us, are the children of humanity, whether that's AI or something else, will be actually better adapted to actually traveling out through a universe that is huge. It's incredibly large compared to what we're used to.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what this is happening here. Maybe that's what the AI is doing, is traveling out through the universe.
Maybe that's what the original Skynet program was for. Like,
yeah,
like they're trying to make this next generation, and obviously that didn't turn out so well for them. But
yeah. I do like the idea that instead of like if we're leaning into the Matrix idea, where a lot of these stories that are being shown, you know, that we're kind of tying in here, maybe they're all happening inside of the Matrix, right? Like maybe the Terminator movie is an instance inside of the Matrix. So this whole time travel thing, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because it doesn't need to make a whole lot of sense to set up the parameters of the simulation that Skynet's creating. But I love the idea that all of that is happening on a ship that is flying through space at a significant percentage of light speed as it just runs tactical simulations on the creatures that it's holding within itself, right? Both purely AI creatures and creatures that have biological components. Like this is a Matrix running inside of a colony ship that's traveling between Earth and Betelgeuse or something, you know? Like this is just kind of how it's occupying itself in the hundreds of years that it will take it to get up to a significant percentage of light speed and then start slowing down again on its way to another star.
Here's a hot take.
Sure.
What if these Terminators aren't technically like a malicious AI?
Okay.
Like they are actually caretakers for humans that are traveling through space.
Yeah. That's exactly the idea. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. But because they're not adapted to space travel and they're not going to live or survive the trip.
Yeah.
The robots basically have to sort of caretake this generational ship.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Yes.
Excellent.
We're right on the same line, which is the idea that all of these humans inside of this ship, this colony ship, are being born, put directly into the Matrix, living out lives within the Matrix, and then dying on their way to another star system. Whenever that generation finally gets there, it's going to take whatever humans are alive at the time, start waking them up, and then bringing them into the real world. And maybe that last set, when it knows it's on its way in, it's going to start prepping them for this. You know, you'll see Matrix simulations that are more about like telling them about what's going on and like informing them and giving them information about the star system they're headed towards and like informing them that at some point they're going to wake up and do this thing. But that in the meantime, it doesn't really get any benefit for like, it doesn't need explorers halfway there, you know? So instead it's like, just making up stories like for stuff to happen. You know, it's a little bit bored. It's got to keep all these people entertained. You know, if you die in the, I like, one thing I hate is if you die in the Matrix, you die in real life. That shit. I like the idea that if you die in one Matrix, which is one of the simulations being run inside of the world ship, it just like puts you into something else and just like uses your brain. Like it just, you go back into the gamer waiting room to be respawned somewhere else to a different part of a story, you know, and it can just edit your memories so that it seems like you were always there, but instead you've been added in.
Okay. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah. I'm down for that. That is really cool. And that the AI is not malicious. It's nothing that's no, like the things that happen inside of the Matrix aren't real in a sense. Like they don't do permanent damage to things. And so it can, like, at that point, if you can edit memories, you can even like erase trauma and stuff. Like if somebody dies in a way that like causes them extreme trauma, you can just remove the memory from that person's brain and reprogram them. There is some really nasty things within all of that about consent, but like, I guess we're just going to ignore that. We're going to hand wave that whole problem right now. I'm not sure how you go on that one, but it's still interesting. It's sort of a thought experiment that since we're not having to actually make these moral judgments right now.
I am kind of curious, like it kind of goes back to that question of a benign or benevolent creator.
Yeah.
Like why are you putting them through all this trauma if...
Yeah. And I think it's the stance that the AI might take is that it learns from these simulations, that it gathers information from these simulations, and that the information gathered is worth the suffering in the meantime, and that it does what it can to minimize it, but that it needs it to learn. And so therefore it's justified. That's kind of the same philosophical thought process behind using live animals for testing in science and medicine and stuff like that, is that like it's the value of what you get out of it that makes it justified. That could be.
I know in the original, or in the Matrix, they were talking about like they tried like sort of an idyllic world for the humans at first, and humanity rejected it because it didn't feel believable.
Yeah. And this raises an idea which I as a thought experiment, I think is fantastic, which it's very difficult for you to justify us living in, not very difficult. It can be difficult for some people to accept the idea that we live in the real physical universe. It's much more likely that we are in a simulation. And one of the ideas I've thought about is the idea of AI afterlives, where far in the future, right? You have an AI who's, essentially omnipotent, right? Like it has garnered all of the energy sources from an entire galaxy, and it's just doing whatever the heck it wants. What it could actually do is gathering information about the people that it has in the past could resurrect them inside of a matrix in order to give them an afterlife, in order to say, okay, Zach, you die, let's say at the end of your lifespan, 20, 40 years from now, then 10 million years from now, just enough information exists about you within the concordance of all knowledge that gets passed down, that an AI goes, okay, let's make a new Zach, and it gathers as much as its best guess about who you were and the way you acted, and makes an AI version of yourself and puts you in a matrix, and then can let you run around and be your own person again. And so like actually in that sense could create either an idyllic, or if it was malicious, it could create a very evil scenario whereby you get punished for your sins or whatever. Which I guess this podcast technically would count as. But so it's just a thought experiment. Sort of wrapped up with the idea of Rocco's basilisk. Have you know this one?
I'm familiar with that one.
Okay, I'm going to explain for our audience. Warning, I guess, for mimetic warfare problems. Like these are some memes that can hurt people. Apparently, I have not seen that to my effects, but that's what some people have said. Rocco's basilisk is the idea of a future malevolent AI that once it comes into existence, it resurrects people in order to reward them or punish them for their actions in the past, specifically creating the basilisk. So in other words, if I, Scott Paladin, was to work towards creating this evil AI, in the future, it could resurrect me and put me into a matrix heaven where it would reward me for having worked towards its own creation. And similarly, if I did not work towards its creation or worked to try to prevent the creation of a giant evil AI, it could resurrect me and put me into a matrix hell where I would be damned for all eternity and suffer. And that therefore, the possible futures of whether or not this evil, malevolent AI might exist could affect me today about whether or not I work towards making an AI literally makes itself part of my own calculus about my actions today. This is particularly convincing for a certain kind of person. I don't particularly find it compelling myself, although it is an interesting thought experiment.
I'm honestly surprised there isn't like Rocco's basilisk cults. Maybe there is.
The place where it originated was a forum called, I cannot remember the name of the forum. It doesn't matter. And on it, they banned all discussion of it because the main guy who was running it said this is a harmful meme that will cause actual harm to people. And it's giving people panic attacks and stuff. And then naturally, when you ban something like that, people just want to talk about it more. So it's the worst possible way to put a stop to something like that.
Well, clearly that mod was in league with Rocco's basilisk because he was.
Yeah, could very well possibly be. And you know what? This gets around our problem of time travel, because time travel's kind of inherently bullshit. there are interesting things you can do with a story that with regards to time travel, because, it allows you to break causality. But the moment you spend any time thinking about like the consequences of time travel, like it is so hard to keep things straight. Like if you like really honestly work forward from the conclusions of, well, if this, then that, and if this, then that, then like it just breaks down, because there's no longer like you end up with uncaused actions and things like that don't work anymore. So like, and that's at the heart of a story like the Terminator, where a robot is sent back in time to prevent the destruction or prevent the birth of its greatest enemy. But then like, if that doesn't happen, then it never gets sent back. And so like, what timeline do we end up in? Right. But instead, if you're talking about a world where your actual enemies are people creating robots right now in order to eliminate enemies they think might prevent the creation of an AI in the future. Like you can bring that conflict forward only through people essentially trying to game the system and try to work out what's going to happen or not. And you end up with the Roko's Basilisk cult, who would be an interesting enemy in a story. People who are actively working towards creating a malevolent AI because they think that malevolent AI will reward them in the future for creating it.
Yeah, that definitely cuts dangerously close to a lot of religious thinking.
Yeah. But and that's I actually really like that as a motivation for your evil, secret society, your evil dudes in a story, because they are acting completely out of their own self-interest, and that these people aren't required to be cruel or evil. They're doing what they think is like the smartest move, that they're just working in league with something that's going to happen anyway. And so therefore they need to be on the right side of these things. And in fact, lots of them might be doing things like trying to convince the heroes of the story, hey, look, you're on the wrong side. The best thing we can do is convince as many people as possible to work towards the creation of this AI so that as many people as possible get rewarded by it in the future.
Yeah, it's definitely a moral kind of quandary. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Like, especially if there's like a middle ground, like where like, or like where the robot actually wipes out all of humanity first.
Yes. Lots of people feel like there's a big disconnect between the person that exists now and the theoretical version of myself that might exist in a matrix some point in the future, and that my actions and that person's actions aren't really necessarily related to one another, and I don't need to worry too much about it. And so that logic can break down for a certain kind of thinker. Now, an interesting variant on it would be instead, and this is effed up. Okay, so you have an AI that instead of saying, you, Zach, you need to work towards the creation of me, and if you don't, then I will torture a version of you in the future. You could go the supervillain way and say, okay, Zach, if you don't work towards my creation, I'm going to create 1,000 like entities that are going to suffer in the future. Like I am creating innocents that have nothing to do. Like, yeah, it's not you. You won't be suffered by this at all. But I am going to make an innocent creature inside of my own matrix and make them suffer for your crimes if you don't do what I need you to do, which is create me. That's an interesting variant on that same idea. I'm not sure that holds all that much more convincing weight, but it is an interesting variant and a way you could take that.
Well, I mean, if this entity has a way of like determining like your buttons in the past by its vast unknowable knowledge, then yeah, it could definitely like target you where it hurts. Like I'm going to create 1,000 innocent bunnies and throw them into a blender or something.
I may not be remembering the name of the author right, because it's either Charles Stross or it's a Werner Vinge book. But in fact, it might be a series. But one of the features of the universe is that at a certain point, history gets edited because somebody, like literally what happened, the best way to explain it is somebody mucks around with the timeline and breaks a bunch of stuff. And like the only thing that people can figure out is that an AI was created that was powerful enough in order to like violate causality and do some time shit. And like it went back in time and messed around with stuff and like became like an uncaused cause. And like that the universe is actually kind of broken after that. Like it took people from various timelines and like moved them around and like spot them on different planets and stuff. And then told all of them basically, okay, there's only one rule, and that is don't mess with my own creation. I'm going to happen in the future and you can't with that. Okay. And like literally tells everybody what the deal is. Like, and you never actually see whatever weirdness, time causality problems happen in the in that point, but the AI enforces it to like a deadly degree. Like, because according to special relativity, I believe it's special. It could be general relativity too. But anyway, according to relativity theory, if you can travel faster than the speed of light, then kind of by definition, you can travel into the past. And so in this particular fictional universe, future faster than light travel is possible. But if you do it in a way that violates causality, this omnipotent AI kills you is basically the answer. It goes, no messing around with causality, and blows your ship up. We have ranged quite far from our original meat suit skeleton guys.
Yeah, but I'm happy where this has gone.
It's still fun. Yeah. Well, I think we've got a couple of different versions of interesting Terminators. I definitely like our colony ship AI Matrix version. That's the cool one, the one that I want to tell stories about. But yeah, definitely any kind of mixing of AI that are interested in the biological and utilizing it is very cool. So I think that is it for us this week. Join us again in 2 weeks. I don't know what the topic is because we haven't decided what it'll be.
Until next time.
All right, bye. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Monster Mechanics. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by me, Scott Paladin, and hosted by myself and my best friend, Zach Jaquays. All of the ideas generated during this podcast are released under a do what the f*** you want public license.